Welcome to our second EDTech Monday Uganda, brought to you by the MasterCard Foundation in partnership with the Innovation Village through the EDTech Lab. The EDTech Monday Uganda is the country version of EDTech Monday Africa, a platform to engage Uganda's EDTech community and other relevant stakeholders, including the government and private sector, on the emerging topics of education and how technology can address any of these challenges. EDTech Monday will be held once a month as we dissect the education sector and the future of education and the available opportunities to grow that sector. This month, we particularly have a conversation on Digi-Learning. Can education technology address and expand the access to education? And joining me in studio is an elite panel to discuss this. I want us to introduce ourselves, I think starting with you, Catherine, and we get to Netstudios. Yes.
Thank you very much. I am Catherine Opondo. I am the Executive Director for Concern for the Girl Child, and I'm privileged to be a part of this panel.
What does Concern for the Girl Child do?
Concern for the Girl Child takes care and interest in the girl child, particularly education, healthcare, and child protection.
All right, thank you so much. Ronald?
Thank you, Raymond. I'm Ronald Sawuhinja. I am the Chief Technical Officer at Uganda, a technology company which focuses mostly on fintech. But the reason I'm here is because I founded an EdTech company back in 2011 called Schoolmaster Solutions. We were working on solutions, technology solutions for schools. And during my time there, I learned a lot about the education sector in this country.
All right, thank you so much. And Netstudios.
Thank you. My name is Netstudios Chandiru. I'm an education specialist working at UNICEF Uganda. I feel honored to be here today to discuss this topic. And at UNICEF, we are a development and humanitarian UN agency mandated by the UN General Assembly to protect the right of children and to see to it that they achieve their full potential. While ensuring that children are alive and thriving, that is health, and that they are learning, that's education, and that they are safe, and that's child protection. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. So I want us to start the conversation, and maybe I'd start with you, Catherine.
Yes.
Just set the stage for us. What's the space for technology in our current education sector?
Thank you. The space for technology in Uganda now, I see it flourishing in the urban areas for these reasons. There has been a wide spectrum of access to technology information, not only by institutional learning, but by the youth, family, lifestyle. So there's just I would call it a blow up. It's a blow up. And for us in Uganda, the COVID-19 pandemic was a light bulb moment for many people. All of a sudden, people were locked down, and the only options they had were to access information on any platform that they had. So there's an outbreak, if you like, if you call it an outbreak, there's access to anything and everything in the areas. So when it comes to the education sector in Uganda, I feel strongly that the urban areas have the pie. They have the biggest pie of interest, of access, and of accessibility. Every Ugandan can now access a mobile phone or any gadget. They can access it. But because of the lack of infrastructure, they cannot, the people in the villages, the girl child in the village, cannot thrive or cannot find themselves hearing this story that we're talking about. She's shut out completely. So I feel like we need to come to the place where we're having this conversation and say, how do we find equity? How do we find equity in digital exposures through education and learning for the Ugandan child? Every Ugandan child deserves equity.
Ronald, she mentions really strongly about equity, but I wanted us to also talk about just the technology itself. And considering that you've been in that space before, what's the kind of uptake of technology by schools, and how different is it in the rural areas to those in the urban areas?
Right. Thanks, Raymond. It's very interesting. Over the past 20 years, I would say, there's been a complete transition. When we started working on the idea that became Schoolmaster, very few schools had even a single computer. A few of them, the really good schools, had some, although a lot of them were basically handoffs, donations from, from foreign countries and so on. This was early 2000s. The internet was nothing to talk about really in this country. But over the next 20 years, we saw a lot of schools getting interested in acquiring infrastructure for IT, especially when the ministry mandated the teaching of ICT as a subject. They were forced to set up labs because they couldn't teach without that infrastructure. But that said, a lot of that infrastructure was underutilized in most schools. It was also neglected. A lot of the maintenance that was supposed to be done was not being done. And so a lot of the labs were actually white elephants. But in some schools, especially the high-end ones, the top schools, they were utilizing these labs. The students were actually accessing the internet, and they were getting value from that infrastructure. But there was and there still is a gulf between the top schools, the urban schools, and the rural schools.
Would we say that the perfect bet for the future of education lies in technology, advancing access to technology for schools?
That is an interesting question. And the reason is I'm a parent, and being both a technologist and a parent gives you access to, you view things quite, it's very interesting. Now, during the pandemic, my own observation was that technology is very useful for kids above a certain level. The ones who actually have that motivation to and discipline, maturity, to actually consume that the content being delivered by technology. But below a certain age, it is still necessary to have that human touch.
All right. Night Stella, I want to bring you in on the conversation on equity. The access to technology has increased the inequalities that we already had in society. The rural areas, for example, do not have the same access to technology as the urban areas. But even more fundamentally, technology access across gender, the gender divide. In the schools that you go to, you find that boys have more access to technology than the girls do. How do you address these inequalities so that access to both education opportunities equal for all of them?
I would like to respond to you looking at the systems approach to all this, because until we have the systems approach to addressing the issue of technology, we might not make a very big leap in this digital era where we now have digital citizens, something that as the education sector we've been running away from. Why do I say running away from? As you will know, the most basic thing like smartphones are not allowed for even secondary students in school. So those are like the basic ways they would be supported. So luckily and thankfully, I would like to say, because we've been in this space for a while, advocating with ministry, of course, including other partners, for the ministries to establish and develop a policy, education, EdTech policy for the sector, because there have been a number of partners in this space, including us, but we had limitations because we did not have a policy framework to guide our interventions. So any partner could come with anything. So we have been working very hard and collaborating with ministry, including other education partners, including even establishing coordination structures as some of the knowledge avenues to establish what's in the space. I'm very thankful that with our support and also other partners, that ministry has now is in the process of concluding a policy for the sector, but they've also developed a digital agenda framework. And the digital agenda framework, which is now a very clear and well-designed strategy that has recently been concluded and is yet to be widely disseminated. That now gives very fertile ground for what was always a bottleneck to supporting EdTech initiatives in various angles. I loved it when he talked about the blended learning. Indeed, as much as technology is very core, we still need some of the conventional approaches, especially which enable self-paced learning for the very various category of children, for instance, those with disability, but even children without disability are struggling to learn. So technology gives them that space. But until it is embraced by teachers who, by the way, very many experience a lot of technophobia, by our experience, the kids are ready to run. It just takes them a few seconds to just get it. But the teachers, not all of them, of course, quite a big number, feel threatened. However, to get to your point of the gender, indeed, very true. For instance, if I can use the example of the computer labs, by the way, we also support ICT community centers in refugee hosting districts. You will find that parents, because of protection issues, tend to keep the girls back. Like in rural contexts, they want them to run back quickly and do chores and all these things. In the school context where the computer labs are, I just explained that the fact that teachers don't even give them the basic access becomes a problem. So systemically, we need to address the space, starting also with the teachers, so that the teachers embrace this thing and then they are able to support the learners, and they appreciate that this is something that actually gives them a huge leap and a huge boost, and also a support system for relatively slow learners. Why? Because technology enables them to go back and revise.
I wanted to bring Catherine in, knowing that education is a multi-sectoral sector. So if you want, for example, to change the behavior of teachers with technophobia, it might require a policy overhaul. It might also require retooling some of these teachers. What are the kinds of investments that we need to be making now in human resource and in infrastructure to sort of make technology the actual get route for education?
If you will allow me to share a story from the work that we have done. I was talking about some of the rural villages where we work. About almost 10 to 15 years ago, we went into a village called Mazi in Luero. And we were privileged to have a grant, but also we worked with the Church of Uganda. They donated land. We constructed what we call a multiple resource center, and received a donation of 25 computers in there. And at that time, there were some schools in the neighborhood, but one specific school where we were programming had 5 teachers, more boys than girls in the school. And as I speak, there are about maybe 30 teachers because of that community structure that was there. The Ministry of Education came in. You know, when you set up some things, it attracts other actors in the community. But when you talk about technophobia, which was not just affecting teachers, but also parents, we decided to open up the computer lab to community, to teachers and parents. Mothers who did not speak English can type. Fathers who could not use the computer can now come in and use the computer. Mark you, I mentioned we cannot access internet yet because we do not have the infrastructure. As I speak, we have about maybe 7 girls for the first time chose ICT at their HSC from Mazi village because of the interest of what they found in the community. Before that, they would just say, I'll do tailoring, which is not bad, but they picked interest. They were like, no, let's disrupt this area. I found that wonderful. We have a girl doing mechanical engineering at Makerere University right now. So I feel that two things can happen. We can work together as communities, or we can rally more people to go in there in the rural areas and set up structures like that, but also begin to tackle the mindset that is with the parents. We notice most of the mothers are also child mothers. They're very young. So we're saying, okay, if you find it difficult to go to school, come with your mother to this lab and let's play this game. Let's do this disruption. If I'm nervous about my child accessing internet, what about the TV station? What is on? What is it that my child is being exposed to that will attract them to scroll for something new on the computer? Okay, so for us, the context of child protection needs to spread beyond the physical, because we're always thinking that it's just physical violence. But if we're thinking about their mind, being able to access them, we have to set up systems that are really safe, but it has to also show with what we already have that is unsafe and disruptive. So going back to you, the question is, what are we doing? Can we encourage such community centers? Can we encourage? I'm excited because the government has finally vocationalized education for children. So children everywhere can access learning with practical skills.
Ronald, in terms of the investments needed, just core infrastructure, what kind of investments do we need to make? And also understanding that technology alone, just access alone is not enough. There's now equally, we need to learn things like code as a language. What kind of investments does government need to make now?
Okay, so number one, in terms of infrastructure, I don't know if it would be the government doing that investment, although they're actually playing a part as well. They've set up a national backbone. NITA is setting up data centers. So yes, they feel that they too can play a role. But I think a lot of this is down to the private sector, because they're the ones that really know how to allocate capital efficiently, if we're to go into, into the economics of things. So there still needs to be a lot of infrastructure investment. We do not have, adequate internet access in many parts of the country, much as the providers will tell you, we cover 90% of Uganda. The truth is, the moment you go into some rural areas, the coverage is really patchy and not good. But the infrastructure is probably the easier part. It's one thing to have in place the infrastructure, it's another to actually utilize it. Now, to utilize it, you need two things. Number one is the know-how in terms of human resources that know how to leverage this technology the best way possible. And then number two, you actually need the content. Of course, the content is created by those skilled people, so that's why I've started with them. Now, how do we get, people that can actually leverage this technology? It has to be a concerted effort, and it starts early. You're not going to convert someone who's been teaching for 10, 20 years into someone that actually knows how to create digital content that is captivating and that actually, serves the purpose of teaching, of kids learning. That calls for actual research into understanding that. Then when it comes to other areas, there are probably a couple of other things that we would need to do to leverage that technology best. There's work to be done in terms of policy. There's work to be done in terms of the pricing of data access and so on. There's work to be done in understanding where do we even host this content, because a lot of the content we consume is hosted abroad, but accessing it is expensive. So if we're to host this stuff in our data centers, then what do we need to do? Do we need to, for instance, establish relationships with guys who've already created really good content? Because creating content is extremely difficult and expensive. And I admire you guys who do video editing and so on, because I've tried it and it is difficult. But there are people who've already done this stuff. So how do we enter partnerships with them to get this content and host it locally. So there are so many questions that need to be answered, of which infrastructure is probably a very expensive portion, but not the hardest, so to say.
All right, thank you so much. We're going to take a very short break, but when we get back, we continue the conversation on just how can technology increase access to education in Uganda. Thank you so much for coming back to EDTech Mondays, brought to you by the MasterCard Foundation in partnership with the Innovation Village through the EDTech Lab. And today we're discussing just what the role of technology can be in access to education. Nightsteller, when we broke off, Ronald had made some really important submissions on working together as partners to be able to make technology accessible for everyone. And I just want us to pick up on that kind of conversation. How do you, if you were to picture, how do you think partners can work together to make technology and access to education much better?
Thank you very much, Raymond, once again. Maybe as a starter, I would like to say that COVID, though a disaster in quotes, became quite an opportunity, especially for Uganda. Like I mentioned earlier, previously the EdTech space was more or less like limping because I mentioned earlier that for us to fix this and have EdTech really mainstreamed and rooted in the education sector, which has been lagging behind in technology. By the way, if you will observe that teachers are quite behind when it comes to technology as a means of providing service that is facilitating quality learning outcomes. But when you see health sector and others, they've quite embraced technology. Even though EdTech is supposed to be a very perfect equalizer. I personally come from Yumbe, up in West Nile, very rural district, but you would find that with technology, because they have a lot of refugee population with ICT centers, you find a child is able to access the same content as one in Gayaza or elsewhere. That's the beauty about it, but it also became very excluding because of the category of children that she was talking about. That's why the issue of coordination is very key, that we leverage on the space that started during COVID, and now also the education development partners, where we are participating as well, have started an EdTech working group as well. What we would like to see now is for the ministry to be on the lead, and it has already established a technical team that developed the framework, that are working on the policy, and we want to see all the different partners come in this space. But this space should not stop at the national level.
It should break down
to go down to the grassroots, to the districts. That is where the real work is happening.
Catherine, I wanted to bring you in on this. What would that kind of collaboration that she's talking about, what would it look like for you? How would you like to be plugged in? How would you like to change the space? Is there space for you to have your ideas adopted nationally and broken down to the regions? How would that happen?
I think for a start, if we could map out, it's good to do some research. Who's doing this kind of innovation? Who has started? Who has engaged the communities? Map out these people. For example, Innovation Village or the hub centers, map them out. Let's get together. Who are they working with? I'm sure none of them is working in isolation. And the districts have also put out a word to us as civil society and implementers in communities. Please come, we no longer want you to work in isolation. So let's sit at the local level. Let's start there. Let's start basics. Let's sit at the local level. Let's talk about what we're doing so that we're not working in silos. And let's consolidate. What are you doing? What do you have? Ministry of Education has brought in a science lab. Great. I have brought in computers. Great. Whichever partner is available has brought in something, innovation. Great. How can this work for the community? But if we're all running, oh, I've set up something, well done. Pressmen, come, take the pictures. You know, if we can come together and just agree for once to work together. In my view, when I hear that over 10,000 girls have been victims of domestic violence and defilement, and for us as CSOs, we're registering over 10,000 who might be pregnant, there's likely to be a baby boom. That means 10,000 girls will not go back to the mainstream type of education. What are we doing in the community to say, look, okay, yes, there will be many child mothers. Can we have a center, community center, where they do not feel left out? Who is there? Who is there? Who is there? What can we do together? Can we point them to the places where they feel safe? Yes, I'm a child mother, but I don't have to feel afraid to go out. So that coordination, which is guided through the ministry, not suffocated, but guided through the ministry, and the district, local government, and international partners, I think it will just create safety and sanity. Otherwise, we're wearing out the community. We're inviting them, come for this meeting, come and study here, you know, and then they get worn out. They're like, who is this now? Who is this? You know, they get worn out. But when we come together and we say, we are the people who serve in this district, we're here to work together with you. It will also, you know, bring an enablement. It will be sustainable for us as a country. When we look at it that way, then we will put down our egos.
And get the job done. Yeah. Ronald, someone would imagine that a pandemic that kept kids out of school for almost a year was a perfect opportunity for unity to happen. Why isn't it happening?
I think the most important thing for us as we move forward is to start with the basics, essentially. We don't have to, you know, to try and look at what very advanced countries are doing in this field. We need to look at what would work for us, especially given where we are, and start from that. Something to note, and it's been my experience in this field, is that it does not attract a lot of investment. If you're looking for venture capital and you have a startup in EdTech, it's going to be extremely hard for you to raise funds as opposed to someone who's doing a fintech, for instance, who is doing an e-commerce startup. Now, that is something that we need to look at, and the various stakeholders need to know that it's a field that needs investment, even if the returns are not, you know, the kind of profits that shareholders and other entities would get. It is an investment in the future of the country. So the government and other stakeholders must come together and invest and continue working together, start with the basics, do research into what would be the most profitable way, the most effective way of getting technology into education, and build from there, move on from there.
I've had a lot in this conversation about the basics, but what is actually the basics for a school to get into access to education using technology?
Okay, so recommend. Yes, so there are various levels. The very basic level is where you're basically trying to do what you do in class and deliver that via technology. I'd say that, for instance, if a teacher creates soft copies of his notes and distributes them to his students via email, that is using technology, and that would enable the students to actually pick something. But it is not as, you know, it's not as attractive. It doesn't really attract the kind of attention if someone, you know, says they're using artificial intelligence to do this and do that. And no, we need to start from there, create content, disseminate it. Then from there we can move to the next level, which would be using technology to help in assessing the progress of children. So yes, you're disseminating notes. Now, can you come up with, you know, online assessments that allow these students to actually do those assessments, and technology helps you to assess what the weak points are, and so you're able to get a lot more insights as opposed to if you are simply marking. Now from there, the next step would probably be to create more enhanced content. If you're simply creating notes, that's not very expensive, but it's easy to do. But at the end of the day, you're not leveraging all the power of technology. So how do you move from creating notes? If you've created notes, geography notes, for instance, How do you move to adding elements that are only available via technology? Things like audiovisual content. If you're talking about the geography of Poto, can you incorporate, moving pictures that really bring that home? Now that would require a lot more investment, but if it is something that's going to raise the quality of education that students receive, then it's a worthwhile investment for the people in charge of the sector. We need to move away from looking at schools as purely profit centers to actual investments in students who will transform the country at an appropriate time. Yeah.
Stella, what's the future of this conversation? Where do we go now from this point?
Actually, I'm very, very positive now, ever than before. Just like I explained previously, with the lack of a policy framework in place, different people were doing different things, and there was no synergy, limited collaboration. But like I explained earlier, that space is now getting better, and the sector, most importantly, has finally embraced and seen the value of technology in this digital era. And it is clear that everything, if you notice today, everything is e-something, e-agriculture, e-commerce, e-learning. So that is the space that exists, and that's the future. So the future, for me, I see is bright. Ministry now has the skeleton in place. So what they need now is the flesh, and the flesh is what you and you are already doing a very good job by starting this discussion. We want every child not to be left behind.
Catherine, we've talked about the solution, but I want to hear, does the solution address the already existing inefficiencies of education? Does it address the inequalities? Does it address the crisis of girls staying in school? Does it address the quality of education being delivered to everyone? Do you think that technology will do that for us?
I think that I do not want to limit education to schools or institutions. Education happens anywhere. And when we get to that level where we know that education is not limited to schools, that maybe might help us understand what technology can do for this country, can do for us as a people. Because what I see, like I said, if I'm thinking about the 16 or the 14 or the 10,000 girls who may not go to the conventional education systems because they're now mothers, and yet they're children, and yet they deserve an education. So what systems are they going to be able to access? What's going to happen to their learning? And how then do they tap into technology? If we see it that way, then education ceases to be a school or an institution. It becomes life, it becomes a way of life, it becomes progress. And it definitely, this is the way to look at it as infrastructure. Thank you.
Ronald, very finally, what message would you send to someone watching today who feels that technology might be the future, or maybe who has challenges with accessing technology as the future? What message would you leave for them?
Okay, just following on from what she said, I think there's one big elephant in the room, and that is the fact that technology still has a cost. We're talking about accessing technology and so on, but even if you have all the infrastructure in the world, end users will need devices. They'll need certain devices. They'll need to have some level of spending power to actually utilize and access these services. So that is something that needs to be worked on. It may call for subsidies. It may call for special low-cost devices. It may call for setting up community centers for communal access. Like there used to be libraries. Instead of libraries, can we now have community centers equipped with equipment that can be shared in case it's prohibitively expensive for individuals to access these gadgets. Now, to the people who are watching, there are different people watching, definitely. Parents like me who have kids, I'd encourage them to embrace technology. But there are policymakers who are watching as well. Now, they need to, to take this seriously. They need to basically revise what they've been doing, see what can they do to stimulate the sector, what areas can they invest in. I'd like to commend the Ministry of ICT because they've been investing in startups. And for the past 2 years, they've actually invested in EdTech startups as well as health ones. They need to double down, see which ones are working, invest even more, get them to work together so that, there are no, unnecessary competing interests, that they all work together to deliver, services and products that will actually deliver what we're looking for. Then the people in charge of the telcos, we need to encourage them to, to step out of just the profitable areas and take connectivity everywhere. If we're talking about 4G, let there be 4G in Katakwi, deep in the village, in Tesoro, in the rural areas of Yumbe, and so on. That way, we'll be able to progress as a nation.
Knight, what are your parting shots on this subject?
Thank you very much once again. I believe, like I said, since the space is now fertile with the policy frameworks on, the bigger issue now is how this translates into quality learning achievements for children at the school level, at the community level, and at household level. I really loved what she said when she talked about COVID taught us that learning is not a four-walled classroom. We knew that before, but our minds were still closed to the classroom. Now we got to learn that children can learn anywhere, anytime, under any context, under a tree. The most important thing is what's the space. Now, with this reality that we have, that there are children in rural areas that don't necessarily have this access that our children enjoy, like they've been doing Zoom classes and so on. For instance, I would like to use very basic examples. Maybe in a whole group of young people, there is one who has a smartphone. They could come up with solidarity groups where they convene around one smartphone, they contribute 500 shillings to buy maybe data. Then at school level, maybe they have one computer, and the teachers can be supported to organize group learning either at the school or within the community, so that there are more children accessing that kind of support and so many other avenues. And then you have a child-friendly or adolescent-friendly space which can then give where parents are able to supervise and probably also come and engage, so that they build the confidence that their daughters, especially daughters, I've mentioned daughters, but a mother of sons and daughters, yes, yes. I am breaking it down to the real need down on ground, and also for us to help parents to appreciate that if they don't embrace this thing, their children are completely going to be left behind. Some of them, they don't see that yet, so it's our role to help them to see that. Thank you.
Parting shots, Catherine?
Thank you. I would like to encourage, she has summed it up for us really well, and he has also given us the foundations. But I would like to see us doing collective work and advocating wherever we go, to advocate for embracing technology as an opportunity for us to access learning, knowing that learning transcends our boundaries. But I'm hoping that Uganda will not be left behind, because by the time we start to embrace, there will be new technology, there will be new things. But the principles, I hope that we can even wake up one day as Uganda and we create our own technology and our own devices that we can make, Ugandans are geniuses. The average Ugandan is a genius. I'm hoping that the first girl and first boy who will create tailor-made smartphones and computers will make computers for Uganda, computers for Ugandans, with solutions for Ugandans, solutions that fit our climate, solutions that fit our vegetation and things that we need here that work for us. And so I'm excited to see the future for just girls and young women and all boys and girls in community.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Of course, this conversation is not stopping at the MasterCard Foundation. In partnership with the Innovation Village, the EDTech Mondays will continue, and we will continue to have more conversations about the education space and the technology space and just how better they can get. Thank you so much for our viewers, and thank you so much, our panelists, for joining us today. Have yourselves a good day.